I have terrible microphone technique because I'm, by training, a historian, an academic historian, and I'm used to standing in a lecture theatre and yelling. So I tend to wander around and forget that mics exist. And I do this because it's in the way, you know, it's like this big... It's like having a Dalek staring at you, frankly. Anyway, I'm Kari Sperring, and I pass for a local science fiction writer, though I'm actually a fantasy writer. I'm also, in my other life, Carrie Maund, historian of the Celtic-speaking peoples in the early Middle Ages. So I've actually written and published both fiction and non-fiction. And now, me talking about the business of writing for 3/4 of an hour will be dull. So what I thought I'd do is sort of witter for about 10 minutes, and then you ask me things, and we'll see, you know, and put in suggestions. Because there are areas I don't know a whole bunch about. I don't know a lot about self-publishing, for example. I know some bits and pieces, but it's not something I've done much of myself. But basically, publishing, everybody always says, and they say this about academia as well, ooh, it's the worst it's ever been. I've been in this business since 1812, and I can't remember a time when it was this bad. Oh, you know, back in my day, authors were allowed 2 legs, now they're only allowed 1. It's always the worst possible time. Authors and academics are probably the most pessimistic human beings on the planet, probably because it is one of these things, it's a funnel profession. Lots of people do it, and lots of people do it really well, but only a very small number are noticed, which isn't the same as the number that are published either. It is really pyramidal, but unlike something where you gradually go up, like the civil service, where you go up a grade and you start as an administrative assistant and you end up as a private undersecretary to the Treasury. It doesn't work like that. There's no known mechanism why author A, oh sorry, I leant on the table. Oh, God. This is worth the Sidgwick site, which has got musical paving stones. So author A, nobody really understands the mechanism why author A will instantly become a success, although the I'll come on to instant success, and why author B will spend years and years and years plugging away and then become an overnight sensation. And author C will never really get anywhere at all. There are a few basics. I'm assuming, given people in the room, that everybody knows the bum on seat, words on page. There are an awful lot of people who are writers who never write anything. I'm assuming everyone present writes, gets the words down. Okay. First, there are a lot of books out there on how to be a writer. I mean, there's a whole industry in writing books about writing, and God knows how you get to write one of those. I'd love to, because they tend to sell extremely well, but no one's ever asked me. And they all come with various different sorts of advice. The most common one is, people say they haven't got any time. Oh, get up half an hour earlier and write then. This works if you're a single person without children, and you're not working shift work, and you haven't got you haven't got the sort of job where you may work long hours. Writing is not a one-size-fits-all profession. So the thing I'll start off by saying, yes, a definition of a writer is somebody who writes, but don't beat yourself up if you're not writing every day, because not everyone can make that half hour. You may not have a quiet environment to write in. You may have a small child, and you can't ignore your small child to write. You may be working nights. That write when you can fit it in, but don't feel you have to write 100 words, before 6 a.m. or 1,000 words a day. Find what works for you. Try different things, and different things work for different people. I know people who work 9 to 5. I know people who write only on Sundays. I know people who write in their lunch hour. I have for many years been a lunch hour and sitting in bed, for most of the writing I did all the way through the 90s. I was writing in my lunch half hour in between undergraduates, and at home instead of reading in bed, I'd be writing. At the moment, I'm doing the Zelazny plan, which is make sure you write at least 3 sentences at least 4 times a day. That one works for me because I am someone who gets distracted and I have other things I'm doing. Another writer I know who's in a full-time job writes 500 words spread over whatever breaks she can make. Jeff Ryman, very famous, multiple award-winning writer, only writes on Sundays because the rest of the week he's doing other things. He's got a job and a life and a partner. So find something that works for you, and just because somebody else says you must outline and you must sit down at 9 o'clock every morning and write 1,000 words before you're allowed to, have a cup of tea. If that doesn't work for you, don't do it. It'll drive you nuts. There are all sorts of online resources, ranging from the terminally fluffy Written Kitten. This is you Google Written Kitten, and it's a website, and you type your prose into the window, or you type up in your Word document or whatever you use it, cut and paste into the window. When you've got to the word count you've set, it gives you a picture of a kitten. This works for some people. It really does. There's a group on LiveJournal, of all things very old-fashioned, called Novel in 90, where everybody just reports in at the end of their day. It's a global group, and says how many words they've done. And the aim is you write about 750 words a day, which leaves you with a novel-length manuscript in 90 days. That's quite fun because everybody encourages each other. There are online writers' chat groups. There is a Cambridge writing group. Last time I investigated it, it consisted of a lot of extremely nice, kind, rather upper middle class retired GPs and school teachers and so on in their 70s. But they were all very nice and friendly. So writers write, and there is no rule about how you write or when you write. And that sometimes writers don't write for months or years at a stretch because people have lives and things go wrong. So there are an awful lot of people giving rules. The only rules that really matter are the ones about spelling and grammar, because if you miss those out, then the editor is not going to read the book. Sad but true. If you are dyslexic, get someone to help. There is no rule that says someone with dyslexia can't be a writer. An awful lot of people worry about that. Get a friend to help you proofread and go through it with you and say, okay. So that's the sort of absolute bum on seat, words on page bit. Beyond that, a novel is about, at a minimum, 85,000 words. Most publishers won't look at anything much below that for an adult novel. Novels for children and young adults can be shorter. And there are sub-areas where you can get away with shorter novels as well. Some literary fiction publishers. Ian McEwan's novels are often very short. However, Ian McEwan is an established writer, and I suspect these days it would be quite hard for a new writer to turn in something that's 55,000 words and not get told that's not a novel. If you're writing short fiction, I don't write a lot of short fiction. Science fiction and fantasy, you're in luck. There are lots and lots of markets. They're the famous ones, the published ones: Analog, Asimov's, Orson Scott's Intergalactic Medicine Show, fantasy and science fiction, Strange Horizons. No, that's not a print one. So there's the print ones, and then there's endless online ones: Strange Horizons, Clarkesworld, Apex, Electric Velocipede, Blackgate, many, 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 many. There is a website called Raylan.com, R-A-L-A-N, which lists markets which are open for submissions. There are the Science Fiction Writers of America website has a list of markets. You can find these things, you can find them, and they all have their submission guidelines on their websites. And in these days, thank God, you can send an electronic submission. There was a horrible phase in the early part of this century when there were certain publishers who still wanted you to post the damn paper and would insist on a stamped addressed envelope for return. And there was one very, very important American agency that insisted that the envelope have American stamps on it, because it was a waste of their time to have to send a junior down to the post office to convert one of those international reply coupon things that foreigners used into real postage. And anyway, you people should just look harder, and you can buy stamps online from the American Post Office. Yeah, you can if you have an address in America. That was the Donald Mast Agency, and they have finally stopped doing that after enough writers said, don't be a fuckwit to them. I find the phrase don't be a fuckwit is very useful, though I don't generally say it to people with more power than me. I do occasionally. In fact, every Friday I tend to start my day by tweeting don't be a fuckwit, because I have declared Friday to be don't be a fuckwit Friday. So that's very basic, very boring. Publishers' guidelines, again, so you finish your novel, you're looking for something to do with it. You can look for an agent, you can look for a publisher. It is currently easier to get a publisher than an agent. But it's a crapshoot in that some publishers won't take unsolicited manuscripts. That is to say, if you put your manuscript in an email, bung it off to them, they won't look at it. Lover, they will take unsolicited query letters, most of them. There are a few that won't. It used to be you'd go and look at the Writer's and Artist's Yearbook and the Writer's Handbook, which would list all the available markets. You can still do that, and there are online things, but these days it's what most people do is, well, I like books like that. I like David Webber. Okay, who publishes David Webber? Oh, that's Bain. Right, Bain like, I've written a military science fiction epic. Bain like military science fiction epic. Let's send it to Bain. Bain, in fact, take unsolicited manuscripts. So look at what you like, look at what you're reading, look at who seems to be, what the publisher is on the spine. Go and have a look on their website. And it never hurts to send a query letter. Does everyone know what a query letter is? Okay, a query letter. Dear editor, it's useful to find out the name of the editor you want to target. Again, websites usually will tell you who the various editors are. This is who I am. I've written this book. It's about this long. It's about this. It sits in this part of the market. Would you be interested in seeing more? This is, and a little bit about what makes you a particularly good person to have written this book and what makes this book particularly exciting. Query letters, everybody has to come up with their own way of dealing with, but don't print them on, don't put them on fancy paper. Don't put them in Wingdings or any other curly font. Don't perfume them. Don't send the editor chocolate. Plain business letter, because editors receiving letters that are in pink in crayon either assume the author is 6 and go, oh, isn't this cute, and send them a postcard saying, thank you, but your story is too short, or they assume the author has tried it on and bin it. So you want to write something. It's about a page long, and it needs to cover who you are, what you've written, how long it is, anything that gives you a good background. If you won an award for anything, if you've come first in a writing contest, if you done a course in which done a creative writing course, mention that. If you've got relevant publications, mention that. If you are a sculptor and your novel is about a sculptor, mention that you understand the business because that's your background. Yeah. If it's a thriller about that hinges on a detailed knowledge of the working of the London Underground and you were a train driver for 10 years. And I know somebody who has actually sold a novel on the back of having been a train driver. So I can't remember his name, he's a friend of a friend, but there is a guy who has written a very successful thriller on the back of his experience as a London Underground train driver. So give them that information. If the website says query and sample, they'll tell you how many. It might be the first chapter, it might be the first 10 pages. Give them exactly what they ask. Even if that first 10 pages ends halfway through a sentence, maybe clip off the half sentence. Don't push it onto the 11th page just to finish the scene. They mean 10 pages. If they want more, they'll ask you. And then follow it up in about 3 to 4 months. I am famous for being the person who doesn't bother the editor because they're busy, and I let tour books sit on my manuscript for 15 years. Do not do this. This is because I thought editors were so terribly important and they would contact me and it would be rude. Also, I didn't like writers sending letters by international mail. This was in the 90s. don't do this. 3 to 4 months, 6 at the outset, outside. You won't offend them. The worst that's going to happen is they're going to send back, thank you, but no thank you. Agents work on the same principle, but at the moment, many agents there aren't that many of them. They are, generally speaking, not making that much money unless they are agenting J.K. Rowling or Dan Brown. So they have lots and lots and lots of clients. They're terribly busy. They don't necessarily have a lot of time. Look for agents at the beginning of their careers because they'll have more slots. Agents' websites will tell you what they're looking for and whether they're currently taking new clients. This does take a bit of website searching. Agents, so Google agents for fantasy, literary agents fantasy, or literary agents crime, or whatever. Literary agents books about trans. There are agents who only do non-fiction and would be delighted to get a book about the trans of Sheffield. I know a publisher who loves books about trans. But again, query letter. Some agents only want a letter, some agents want a sample. In the UK, you're quite restricted for agents who take SF and fantasy. John Jarrold, who is a very nice man and generally looks and is quick about returning, but he judges on a letter. Xeno, I'm with Xeno. Xeno are currently closed, but when they open again, they're a good agency. They're worth looking at. Anubis and Nick Cheetham. There are a handful of others. More mainstream agents may not know what to do with SF and fantasy. A lot more in America. And these days, most agents work internationally. So if the agent looks good and they seem to want your book and you feel like they're a fit, don't worry because they happen to be in, as a very good agent who works out of somewhere in the American Midwest, Missouri or somewhere like that, doesn't stop her being a very good agent. I got my publishing deal directly with an editor. I didn't get an agent until I was selling my second book. I sold to Door Books, who are an American publisher, and they take unsolicited manuscripts. They also take more or less geological time to get back to you. You have to do a lot of reminding with Door. Quite seriously, it took them 5 years to remember to read my book, and that was involved some prodding from, I had a nibble from a small press in the meantime, and I sort of emailed them and said, I've got a nibble, and they said, can you give us 2 weeks to actually look at it, and then bought it. But, okay, so that's that side of thing. It is never easy. Everybody knows about someone who wrote a book on their way to work on the bus in 10 minutes breaks and then sold it for £1 million to the first publishers they sent it to. Everybody hears a story about that because those stories hit the Daily Mail. They are rare. It is not the norm. It really isn't. And lots of people make a big fuss about, I did, and if I could do it, it's a sign of how great I am. No, it's not. It's a sign of how lucky they were. It really is. Ian Banks, the great Ian Banks, wrote 6 novels and sent them around and got no before he sold his first novel, which was the first one he sold, which was not the first one he wrote, it was the 7th, was The Wasp Factory. And he wrote that because someone said to him, you've got to write something trashy, Ian, and it will sell, so he did, and it did. Hilary Mantel, everyone knows about Hilary Mantel. She was a mid-list writer, that is to say, a writer who got read by a hardcore of about 3,000 to 8,000 people. For every book she read, she was not considered important. She'd been being published since the late 80s. Most of her books sold in small, steady numbers. She had been through 3 or 4 different publishers because she'd write 2 or 3 and the publisher would go, no, she doesn't sell, and they'd fire her. Then she wrote Wolf Hall. Overnight sensation, it only took her 20 years. Most writers are like that. J.K. Rowling was not successful till the 3rd book. Everyone thinks that it started with the Philosopher's Stone was an overnight sensation. It wasn't. They got as far as publishing the 3rd one, and it was going on word of mouth because children were reading it and telling their friends, and parents were buying it for their kids and then their nieces and nephews, and then reading it themselves. It was a log roll. It wasn't an overnight sensation. She got no marketing behind her. Dan Brown had written 5 or 6 books before for some reason the Da Vinci Code took off. That is a mystery to the universe. Donna Tartt, on the other end of the scale, is a huge mega success because the publisher decided to make her a star with her first novel and put $1 million behind an advertising campaign for The Secret History and made sure it was talked about on all the chat shows and that she was interviewed by Oprah and things like that. So don't be put off by the writer who says, oh, well, I'm so good, I just sold first time. Are you sure your book is good enough? They were lucky. And possibly, actually, not as lucky as they're letting you out to be. I am aware of one writer who routinely says this. And we all know that, in fact, she always says, oh, my stuff always sells first time. Those of us who've known her for longer know that, in fact, she has had as many rejections as the rest of us. So. Writers lie. It makes us feel better. The main thing that makes the difference between the amateur and the pro is sticking to it and keeping going and not being put off. And I'm a terrible example of this because I let myself get put off for years to stretch and go and do something else. That's fiction. Non-fiction, completely different ballgame. Do not write a non-fiction book on Spec unless it is for a very niche market. The book on the trams of Sheffield, there is a publisher who publishes things like that. You can probably safely write that book and they'll take it. But you could probably write them an outline saying, look, this is what I want to do. I've been doing research into this for 10 years. I've been rebuilding an old Sheffield tram in my garage, and they'll probably send you a contract. Do not write non-fiction on Spec unless you're doing something really extraordinary. I mean, if you're about to go and cycle across Africa back up on a unicycle, maybe write up your journey and then. But to be honest, non-fiction, find who it is that specialises in military history, natural history, whatever it is, write to them, are you interested? Most non-fiction doesn't need an agent, unless you're going for the sort of kind of memoirs of my cat type market. I don't know about the memoirs of my cat. Most of those seem to be written by journalists, people who've already got contacts in the industry. Contacts are useful. You don't have to have them. Most of the people I know got on without contacts, but if you have got them, use them. I hate saying this because it's so unegalitarian and it's so crap and it's so bloody... Sorry, red writer. It's so rooted in capitalism. But if you've got them, use them because it's a crapshoot. But in the end, it's going to come down to luck. And you will be, if you're, this is true, if you are good enough and you stick at it long enough, you will get there. It just may take longer than you think it's going to. Catherine Cookson was 60 before she sold a book. Mary Wesley was nearly 80. On the other hand, Caitlin Moran sold a novel when she was 14. Sometimes it really comes down to the right manuscript on the right editor's desk in the right moment. What was the name of Andrew Harmon? There was a British writer around in the 90s called Andrew Harmon, who wrote and sold about a series of fairly ordinary comic fantasy novels. And he got published because the day he sent that manuscript to, I think it was Orbit, the editor was looking for an English Craig Shaw Gardner, who was an American writer of rubbish comic fantasy. And lo, there was Andrew Harmon, saying, I am the greatest, who was a fine example of how not to do a cover letter. I am the new Terry Pratchett, you must buy me. But editor in question went, well, he's no Terry Pratchett, but we were looking for something a bit like this, yeah, okay. And he I don't know what happened to him in the end, but there were about 5 by him, weren't there? Yeah, he's probably changed his name. People change their names all the time as well. So that's that side. Is there anything I've missed? Is there anything people want to ask about, or shall I think of some more witchery? Yeah, well I think... Does anyone have a question? Nobody has a question. Oh dear, gosh. It's not that depressing. And the other thing I'll say is actually one of the things I've discovered The thing I didn't know, everyone always thinks there's a magic sort of, I remember this thinking somehow I just crack the code and it would be wonderful, there'd be a secret handshake and I'd be in. There isn't. I wish there was, because that would make it so much easier. It's all about uncertainty. But when you do get the phone call, one of the things that is really extraordinary, and it is, I gather, fairly much to do with SF and fantasy, is that other writers are incredibly nice to you and kind and supportive. Some writers in some areas tend to be competitive and jump down your throats. The SF and fantasy people in general are incredibly nice, mutually supportive. They will give each other, so-and-so's putting an anthology together, better, drop them a line. Or, look, I've heard about a tie-in novel and I don't have time, but I think you might be the right person to do it. Get your agent to ring them up and say, look, let Joe write this book. So one of the advantages of finding a chat room or an online group is that you will make contacts there, and this is what I've heard people call your lateral support group, because writers really in SF and fantasy and crime too support each other. Obviously there are a handful of bastards, and there will be people you don't get on with, because that's life. I mean, working in any workplace, you're going to have one fuckwit and two people that you really don't like very much, and that person who never replaces the milk. And that the writing world is a bit like that too. But on the whole, writers are really nice and really supportive, and they will. Once you've got your first foot on when you've got your foot on that bottom rung, you will find people will be new doors start opening. So as soon as, for example, you're eligible to join one of the professional bodies, in Britain it's the Society of Authors, who are well worth joining. They really are. Apart from anything else, they will read and vet contracts, which is incredibly useful, and they will help you deal with publishers who are reneging. I had a problem with one of my non-fiction publishers who were not paying royalties. And the Society of Authors, there were a whole bunch of us with this publisher who were having this problem. The Society of Authors went and gave them a very, very hard stare. The Society of Authors have the right to call in the books of publishers and go through them and try to join the Society of Authors. Again, on their website, you're already publishing both fiction and non-fiction, and they cover both, don't they? So you may well already be eligible. Go and have a look. Thanks. SIFWA in America, the Science Fiction Writers of America, despite calling itself the Science Fiction Writers of America, it actually has an awful lot of international members. SIFWA are also very useful. They have, and the most useful thing about SIFWA is the news groups, because there's lots of people, information and help on there. There's a news group that's given over to writing problems, and you can sort of say, oh, I've got stuck, what do I do? The dreaded writer's block, everybody has I'm stuck-itis. I don't have a magical cure. What works for me is to make myself write at least one sentence, because if you keep writing, the momentum is there. I know other people who will go down the gym and work out, or go for a long walk. I know people who just say, okay, I'm just going to read and do research for 6 months. My agent has the habit of getting... my agent specialised, or my original agent, who is now retired, but my original agent specialised in very sensible, if slightly eccentric, male writers and very neurotic female writers. And his method of dealing with his neurotic female writers was to get one of the very sensible but slightly eccentric male writers to hypnotise us, because one of them is a professional hypnotist, amongst other things. And when John, my agent, retired and handed us over to his partner, who was also called John, I have a strong suspicion that John II will probably continue to get John III, who is not an agent but is a writer, to hypnotise us.
And has been told the secret command word.
And has been told this, which is given John. This is John Meaney, the SF writer. Given John Meaney, it's probably Kia. John Meaney's a very high-level karateka. One of the high spots. Hopefully, one day you'll get to a 9 Worlds or an EasterCon. Every once in a while, at one of the EasterCons, there's a program item called something like "Fight Scenes for Writers," and what this is actually is science fiction. Is John Meaney, the SF writer, and Juliet E. McKenna, the fantasy writer, beating the crap out of each other, Because John is a 4th Dan karate black belt, and Jules is a 3rd Dan Aikidoka black belt. And they will throw each other all over the room. It's brilliant. And then there's another guy whose name I've forgotten, who is Al Davidson, that's right. Al is in a wheelchair, but he also has a black belt. And seeing someone using judo, I think is what he uses, isn't it, from a wheelchair, he's just terrifying. I've seen him throw both John Meany and Juliette McKenna's husband, Steve, who is 6 foot. I've seen him throw both of them. They both come at him, he got both of them, throw them, and he was out of their reach, all in one move. It's quite extraordinary. Wheelchairs as a weapon is something I'd never previously considered. Most cons have a writing stream. Some of them have a writer's workshop where you get professional writers who will read stories and go through stuff with you. Writing books, I forgot about this. Lots and lots of books on writing. Everybody has. I do know someone who basically put himself through his own writing course. He just started buying how-to books and did all the exercises. And I knew him as a baby writer, and he was terrible. He was just bad. He's now really good, and he's selling steadily. He's selling short stories steadily. Writing books, there are many of them. Many of them are rubbish, but when you hit on ones that are good, the ones that I like and in terms of basic how to do plot, how to do character. There's the one from the University of East Anglia, which is called something like the Creative Writers Course Book. Paul Myers and Julia Bell. Old but useful, a bit dull, very fat, but lots of exercises. Ursula Le Guin did a very short one called Steering the Craft, which is brilliant. Chapters on various things, short exercises, but it's the dipping in and dipping out book. I don't generally get a lot of use out of those. I never have, because I'm one of these people who's been writing stories since she learned to write. So, but what are good? There are also books by writers about their own process. Stephen King on writing, great book. Samuel Delaney's book on writing. Kate Wilhelm's book on writing. Very old book, but just a book everybody still uses. Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, which is a great book because Anne Lamott is herself a writer and she knows how neurotic, anxious and convinced of our own crapness we are. And this is a book written from the heart of knowing your crap. And her tips for dealing with that overnight sensation author who keeps saying, "Are you sure you're that good, darling?" are hilarious. Because she also gets about how other writers can be complete arseholes. That's a great book. Dennis Palumbo. There's a book by Dennis Palumbo, the name of which has gone straight over my head. He's a professional therapist and a writer, and he works with writers. And this is a really good book. Writing from the Inside Out. That's an awesome book. But these are the ones that work for me. My friend Lisanne Norman loves a book called Fiction First Aid, which is a selection of tips and exercises for getting yourself out of when you've written yourself into a corner.